Why did they laugh? Maybe it was the way she stood, shoulders squared but alone in a sea of men. Maybe it was because they thought the story had already been written, that a woman couldn't possibly belong here. Or maybe it was something deeper, something more fragile, fear. Fear that if she made it, they'd have no excuse for their own failure. The morning sun cut through the mist over Coronado's parade ground, slicing shadows across the neat lines of uniforms. 180 candidates stood in formation, boots aligned, fists clenched at their sides. Their eyes burned with nerves and pride. But there was only one anomaly among them, a lone figure whose presence felt like a disruption to the natural order. Lieutenant Samantha Mercer. She kept her gaze fixed forward. No glances left or right, no hint that she heard the whispers. They didn't even bother to hide them. She won't last the week. Political stunt. Waste of a slot. Their words carried on the air, more bitter than the salt that drifted in from the Pacific. The commanding officer's voice boomed over the assembly. Look at the man to your left. Look at the man to your right. Only one of you will be here at the end. His cadence was sharp, deliberate, like a blade cutting through each of them. But as he passed in front of Mercer, there was the slightest pause, a falter in the rhythm, the recognition that she didn't fit the script. His eyes moved on. His voice never broke, but everyone noticed. Behind the rows of candidates, Chief Petty Officer Hayes, a seal with 15 years carved into the lines of his face, leaned toward another instructor. His voice carried low, but Mercer felt it anyway, like a gust of cold wind across the back of her neck. She won't last the week, not in my class. The other man nodded, silent agreement between skeptics. Then came the first command, into the surf. The men charged toward the freezing Pacific, their breath tearing from their lungs as the water seized them. Some cursed, some gasped, others choked back panic, and over the chaos a laugh. Not the nervous laugh of men bracing for pain, but a sharp, cutting sound aimed at her. Mercer didn't flinch. She pushed deeper into the water, face flat, unreadable. Where others fought against the shock, she yielded to it as if she'd been here before. The tests began immediately. 200 push-ups, 2 miles of soft sand running, pull-ups until failure, swimming in full gear. Bodies bent, heaved, and collapsed. A few men tried to hide the retching in the shadows, vomiting discreetly where instructors wouldn't see. But the instructors always saw. They circled like sharks, hungry for weakness. Chief Hayes planted himself in front of Mercer during the push-ups. Those are garbage, start over, all 200. Her form was perfect, everyone knew it. No protest came from her lips, no hesitation. She reset and began again. Sweat poured down her face, soaking the dirt beneath her palms. Around her, men exchanged glances. None dared speak. Testing her limits had become the entertainment of the day. By mid-afternoon, muscles burned like fire, lungs tore with each breath. Faces contorted in effort, some broke, others hung by threads. But her expression, composed, controlled, as if pain was something she knew intimately, something she had long since befriended. When they finally broke for a 3-minute water break, the men huddled together, desperate for fragments of camaraderie. Mercer stood apart, solitary, as though some invisible barrier separated her from the rest. She drank her water in silence, her eyes unfocused, already somewhere else. The night before, she had been in her quarters alone. The barracks held more than 100 men, but she had been given a converted storage room, a small space of forced privacy. Another reminder that she did not belong. She had folded her uniform with surgical precision, every crease exact, every item aligned. In her footlocker beneath the neat stacks, a photograph lay tucked away. 4 people, dust rising behind them, combat gear hanging heavy on their shoulders. They stood arm in arm, smiling faintly, not with joy but with the bond of those who had survived together. Mercer was one of them, younger, her eyes different then. She had traced the faces with her fingertips, lingering over each one before closing the locker, a ritual she never spoke of. Now, as the sun dragged itself low, the instructors escalated. "You think you're tired now," Hayes barked. "You haven't seen anything yet. Into the mud pit." They dropped to their bellies, crawling through thick sludge beneath barbed wire, mud clogging their throats, grinding into their eyes. Instructors shouted insults, rifles cracking overhead with blank rounds. Each movement forward was war with the earth itself. Hayes knelt down when Mercer passed beneath him. "Why are you really here, Lieutenant? Trying to prove something?" She gave no sign she'd heard. No pause in her crawl, no flicker in her eyes, just forward, always forward. By evening they stood again in formation, mud drying in thick layers across their fatigues. "Bud S is designed to break you," Hayes roared. "Some of you won't last the month, some won't last the week." His gaze lingered on her. "Ring the bell when you're ready to quit. No shame in knowing your limits." The bell hung at the edge of the compound. Its shine mocked them, polished from countless hands that had gripped the rope and ended their dreams. Just 3 steps, 1 strike, freedom from pain, surrender. That night, Lieutenant Commander Parker sat in his office, watching from his window as the candidates filed toward their quarters. His eyes followed Mercer. He noticed how the men instinctively gave her a wide berth, as though she carried a shadow too heavy for them. On his desk, her file sat thick and marked with redacted pages. He had barely skimmed it. Political pressure, he assumed. The first woman in SEAL training was no coincidence, yet her recommendations from past commanding officers were strong. Too strong to ignore. At 400 the next morning, whistles and shouts tore through the barracks. Mattresses flipped, candidates dragged from bunks. "Rise and shine." Hayes's fist pounded her door. "Mercer, formation, 2 minutes." 90 seconds later, she stood outside, boots laced, uniform perfect. Hayes scowled. He had wanted to catch her unprepared. Day 2 was worse. Endless calisthenics. Log PT with telephone pole-sized weights hoisted overhead, 7 men struggling in unison. Trips into the surf until bodies shook uncontrollably. The instructors prowled, eyes scanning for weakness, ears tuned for a crack in resolve. During a break, Mercer stood alone again. A small cluster of men nearby whispered, their voices carrying on the wind. "She won't make it past Hell Week. Command probably told them to pass her no matter what. Not fair to the rest of us who earned this." Mercer said nothing. She drank, then stood ready when the whistle blew. That afternoon, the first casualty came. A man named Morris collapsed mid-run, his body giving out. Instructors gathered the class. "Morris just learned his limits," Hayes announced. "Who's next?" 2 more rang the bell by sundown. At dinner, Mercer sat at the far end of a table. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic, conserving energy. She ate silently, methodically. Not a bite wasted. Around her, the air was filled with muttered conversations, the exhausted camaraderie of men who shared a storm together. She was outside it all, a world away though only feet apart. Back in her room, she tended her blisters, wrapping tape around her raw skin with practiced care. Her hands didn't tremble. They moved with the calm of someone who had done this before under circumstances far worse. She lay back on her bunk, eyes open, ceiling staring back. But she wasn't there. She was somewhere else, chasing ghosts she didn't name. Morning brought the obstacle course. Walls, ropes, barriers built not just for strength but for mind games. Hayes called her forward. "Mercer, demonstrate the rope climb." Every eye locked on her as she approached the 30-foot rope. She climbed with steady precision, not rushing, not faltering. Halfway, Hayes shouted, "Too slow. In combat, slow means dead." She didn't break rhythm. No acknowledgement, just hand over hand until she touched the top bell and descended with control. On the ground, Hayes didn't offer praise. He didn't offer anything, just silence. Later, teams were assigned for boat drills, 7 per crew. Mercer was named leader of Team 5. Groans followed. Rodriguez muttered, "Great, we get the girl." Their boat floundered, always last. Whether it was incompetence or deliberate sabotage didn't matter. Hayes looked down his nose. "Pathetic. Either your leader is failing you or you're failing your leader. Figure it out." That night, 3 candidates cornered her after the showers. They towered over her, their resentment no longer hidden. "Why don't you quit? Everyone knows they'll never let a woman in." She looked each of them in the eye. Calm, unshaken. "I'm not here to be a SEAL," she said softly. "I'm here to complete training." The words confused them. Before they could respond, Lieutenant Commander Parker appeared, his presence scattering them. He watched her walk back to her quarters, her stride steady. He thought of how she moved like someone accustomed to hostile territory. He returned to his office, pulled her file closer, and frowned at the redacted pages. What was Naval Special Warfare Command not telling him about Lieutenant Samantha Mercer? And what was it she carried inside her that none of them could yet see? What did she see on that screen? That question lingered in Rodriguez's mind long after the briefing ended. The candidates shuffled into the classroom, salt still crusted on their uniforms from the morning surf drills. They were exhausted, eyes heavy, minds dulled by pain and fatigue. But when the instructor pulled up satellite imagery of Syria, showing the terrain where a special operations team had been ambushed 2 years earlier, Mercer's posture shifted. Just slightly. Barely noticeable except to the man sitting beside her. Rodriguez had been watching her for days now, not because he liked her, not yet, but because there was something about the way she moved, the way she endured. She wasn't like the rest of them. When the instructor described the ambush, a 4-man team against an enemy 3 times their size, Rodriguez saw her hand tighten around her pen. Her knuckles turned white. For just a second her mask slipped. Then she forced herself calm again, taking notes like the rest. Later, when he leaned over and whispered, "You knew something about that op, didn't you?" She didn't even glance his way, just kept writing. "Trust is earned," she said finally, her voice even, her face unreadable. That answer stuck with him. The ocean was waiting for them next. The drown-proofing drill, hands bound, feet tied. Survival stripped down to willpower and lungs. Mercer was paired with Evans, a swimmer who had never once hidden his disdain for her. "Try to keep up," he muttered, smirk curling his lips. They dropped into the water. For minutes that stretched like hours, they bobbed, sank, and surfaced. Evans thrashed through the exercises, coughing and spitting. Mercer moved with unsettling calm, like the water was her element, not her enemy. She demonstrated recovery techniques as if she'd been born for them, even bound, even gasping. One instructor leaned toward Hayes. "She's comfortable in the water." Hayes's reply was almost a sneer. "Let's see how she handles the next phase." The pool test came after. Retrieve gear from the bottom while instructors tried to sabotage you. Masks yanked away. Hoses tangled. Simulated chaos. When Mercer dove, 2 instructors followed her down. They focused on her harder than they had anyone else, tugging, clawing, trying to disorient her. But she didn't fight them. She stayed deliberate, methodical, untangled the gear, secured her air, surfaced with everything required. No drama, no flair, just precision. Hayes narrowed his eyes. He didn't understand her, not yet. By the time the day ended, 3 more men had rung the bell. Quitting was contagious. One surrender echoed in the ears of the others, but Mercer never even looked toward it. That evening, Rodriguez carried his tray across the mess hall, hesitated, then sat across from her. It was the first time anyone had. "What happened in there today?" he asked. "During the Syria op briefing." She lifted her eyes, cool, steady, "Just taking notes." "Bull," he said, "you knew something." "Look," he continued, softer now, "I don't care why you're here, but if we're going to survive this as a team, we've got to trust each other." "Trust is earned," she repeated, returning her focus to her food. Their exchange was cut short when Evans dropped his tray beside them, loud enough to draw attention. His smirk was venomous. "What is this? Special training for the diversity hire, or are you 2 planning your wedding already?" Rodriguez tensed, ready to stand, but Mercer's voice cut in first. Calm, almost conversational. "You burned about 50 calories with that comment. Might want to replace them before tomorrow." The table around them went silent. Evans froze for half a beat, jaw tightening. Then he stood and left, muttering. Rodriguez blinked. He hadn't expected her to fight back like that. And yet she hadn't raised her voice, hadn't flexed. She'd simply deflected like water off stone. "Nicely handled," he murmured. For the first time, there was something like respect in his tone. That night, alone in her quarters, Mercer sat on her bunk, checking her gear. A small metallic object slipped from her pack, clinking against the floor. She picked it up carefully, a tarnished silver cent, Michael metal, the patron saint of warriors. She rubbed her thumb over its worn surface, then tucked it back into a hidden pocket. Her lips moved slightly, a whisper no one else could hear. Then silence again. Across the compound, Parker was on the phone, his voice low, tense. "If she's carrying operational trauma, I need to know. It could endanger her. It could endanger others." The answer on the other end was firm. "That information remains compartmentalized. Lieutenant Mercer was cleared. That should be sufficient." "With all due respect," Parker said, his voice rising, "something happened in Syria. I can see it in her responses." "Continue your standard evaluation protocols, Commander. Nothing more. That's an order." The line went dead. Parker stared at her file. So many blacked-out pages, so many secrets. The next morning was combat drills, hand-to-hand sparring. The instructors paired Mercer with Evans, deliberately. "Remember, control your strikes. This is about technique." Evans's smirk returned. He lunged at her, aggressive, fast. She sidestepped, redirected his momentum. He swung again, harder, less controlled. She swept his legs, sending him crashing to the mat. The instructor called time. Technique over strength. Mercer demonstrates the point perfectly. The humiliation burned in Evans's eyes. Later, navigation training, charts, coordinates, planning extraction under pressure. Most of the men stumbled through, exhausted and disoriented. Mercer finished quickly, cleanly, her routes not just correct but optimized. Parker reviewed her work. His frown deepened. These weren't the answers of someone studying theory. These were the choices of someone who had been there. The day ended with a test that would break more than a few. A 5-mile ocean swim in full gear. Sunset to darkness. Currents dragging at them, waves crashing. They paired Mercer with Rodriguez. "You ready?" she asked, adjusting his straps. "Born ready," he said, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. 2 hours in, he faltered. His stroke slowed, his breathing ragged. "I'm good," he gasped. He was. "Cramp?" she asked. He nodded, grimacing. Without hesitation, she shifted behind him, massaging the muscle, supporting his weight. "Where'd you learn that?" "Medical training." When the cramp passed, she helped him reset his rhythm, packing him stroke for stroke. Together they pushed forward, barely scraping through the time limit. On shore, Hayes sneered. "Cutting it close, Rodriguez. Lucky your swim buddy kept you afloat." Rodriguez, dripping, broken, shook his head. "Luck had nothing to do with it, Chief." That night he waited outside her door. When she returned, she stopped, surprised to see him there. "Thank you," he said simply. "I would have wrung out tonight without you." She nodded once, acknowledgement without embellishment. Then he asked the question that had gnawed at him since that briefing. "That Syria op, you were there, weren't you?" She looked at him for a long moment. Her face betrayed nothing. Then she said softly, "Get some rest, Rodriguez. Tomorrow will be harder." Across the compound, Parker sat at his desk. A secure file had just arrived, encrypted, classified beyond his clearance until now. He opened it, eyes scanning line after line, his face drained of color. Now he understood. Why she never flinched, why she endured, why she carried silence like armor. Sam Mercer had already survived far worse than anything Bud S. could throw at her. And Hell Week hadn't even started. What does it take to break a human being? That question hung in the cold midnight air as smoke grenades exploded in the barracks and blank rounds cracked like thunder. Candidates scrambled from their bunks, half-dressed, disoriented, already soaked in fear. The shouting was deafening. "Move, move, move. Welcome to Hell Week." Outside, floodlights cut through the artificial haze. 90 candidates remained from the original 180. They stumbled into formation, shivering, lungs heaving. The instructors hosed them down with ice water until their uniforms clung like armor made of stone. Teeth chattered. Bodies shook. Chief Hayes's voice rose above the chaos, steady as a hammer. For the next 5.5 days you will not sleep. You will not rest. You will be wet, cold, and miserable beyond anything you've ever imagined, and most of you will fail. Mercer stood near the center of the formation. While others flinched, gasped, fought to keep their composure, she was still. Not calm, no one could call this calm, but distant. Her body was present, yet her mind seemed elsewhere, as though she had already walked through worse storms. The first command came. Into the surf, last team back fails. They charged toward the ocean, the waves breaking like fists against their chests. Team 5, Mercer at point, held tight formation. She shouted short commands, cutting through the roar of water. Rodriguez followed, shoulders burning, lungs on fire, but her voice anchored him. Together they pushed past the breakers and back. Another team fell apart, scattered by the waves. When they stumbled to shore, coughing and spitting, they were already behind. The instructors didn't hide their contempt. Pathetic, ring out and save us the trouble. One man broke ranks, running to the brass bell. Its sound echoed across the compound. The first quit of Hell Week. Hours blurred into torture. Log PT, their boats overhead as the surf pounded them. Crawling through mud beneath barbed wire while instructors fired blanks overhead. Running miles of soft sand with bodies so heavy they felt carved from lead. By dawn of the first day, 7 more had rung the bell. Rodriguez collapsed beside Mercer during a rare 5-minute break, his body trembling against the wet sand. He whispered, voice cracked with exhaustion, "Did you know? Technically, the human body can go 11 days without sleep before organ failure. We've got reserves." Despite the hollowness in her eyes, Mercer's lips twitched, a shadow of a smile, planning to test that theory. He let out a breath that was half a laugh, half a groan, just saying, "We've got more left in us than we think." Then he looked at her, really looked. "You've done this before, haven't you? Not Hell Week, but something like it." She didn't answer, but her silence said more than words ever could. Evans appeared with 2 others, sneering. "Consultation with our diversity hire. Maybe she can get you out of the next evolution." Rodriguez started to rise, but Mercer stopped him with a hand on his arm. Her voice was quiet, even. "Not worth the energy. Save it for what matters." By midnight of the second day, 17 more were gone. The compound echoed with the sound of the bell, each strike like a funeral toll. The remaining candidates moved like the walking dead. Eyes glassy, muscles trembling. Team 5 carried their boat through endless drills. Hayes singled them out. "Since you've been performing above standard, let's even the field." He tossed a heavy sandbag into their boat. "Excellence under adversity, that's the standard." The weight crushed them, but Mercer adjusted their formation, shifting positions, redistributing load. Her voice stayed level, calm even as her own shoulders bled beneath the strain. Against the odds, Team 5 held their ground in the middle of the pack. Not first, not last, surviving. Dawn of the third day brought the steel pier evolution. Swim the boat out past the breakers, climb the pier with gear, then reverse. Simple in concept. Near impossible after 58 hours without sleep. Evans began to unravel. His movements slowed, speech slurred, classic hypothermia. The instructors watched with clinical detachment, waiting to see if he would quit. Medical corpsmen stood by, ready if his life slipped too far. When he stumbled, falling hard onto the pier, Mercer reached him first. Her hands moved with the confidence of experience. She assessed, acted, commanded. Hypothermia, moderate to severe. She turned him on his side, clearing his airway as he vomited seawater. Stripped his wet gear, replaced it with dry from her own pack. Applied pressure points, began chest-to-chest warming. The corpsman arrived, stunned at her precision. "Where did you learn that?" "Field experience," she said simply, not breaking rhythm. Hayes watched, his eyes narrowing. When Evans stabilized enough to be moved, the corpsman took over. Hayes stepped closer to Mercer. His voice was low, measured. That wasn't basic medical training. No, sir. He studied her for a long moment, then a single nod. Back to your evolution. Day 4 broke with hallucinations. Exhaustion carved away reality. Men saw lights that weren't there, heard voices calling them from the water. Some laughed, some cried, others broke down entirely. The instructors didn't stop them. Weakness was self-selecting. During a classroom test designed to measure mental acuity under exhaustion, Parker gave them a scenario. A 4-man team behind enemy lines, extraction point compromised, multiple hostiles in pursuit. "What's your course of action?" he asked. Candidates fumbled, words slurred, thoughts half-formed. When Mercer's turn came, her answer was crisp, detailed, terrifyingly clear. Routes, contingencies, defensive positions, every detail precise. Parker watched her carefully. "That's a textbook perfect response, Lieutenant, almost as if you've lived it." Her face didn't change. "Just good training, sir." But her eyes betrayed something else. That night Parker met Hayes privately. "I've got clearance now," he said quietly. He handed Hayes a folder. Syria wasn't just a classroom scenario, she was there. Hayes frowned, flipping through the report. His face shifted with every line. Mercer hadn't just been attached to a Marine unit as a medic. She kept 3 critically wounded men alive for 72 hours under constant enemy pursuit. She'd performed emergency surgery with improvised tools, carried 1 man for miles through mountains while bleeding herself. By the time they were extracted, only 1 Marine still breathed. The others had died despite her efforts. Mercer had been declared clinically dead for 2 minutes during the flight out. Somehow, she came back. "She was the reason there was a survivor at all," Parker said quietly. Hayes closed the folder, eyes hardening. He looked back toward the compound, toward the woman who had been crawling through mud, hoisting logs, carrying men who didn't want her there. His voice was rough when it finally came. "And now she's here." By dawn of day 5, only 24 candidates remained. Bones ached, minds blurred, bodies broke. The final evolution was announced, a 20-mile equipment carry. Boats, gear, weapons across sand, surf, and rocks. Team 5 had lost 2 men, fewer bodies to carry the same weight. Rodriguez faltered, staggering beneath the load. Mercer shifted him, took more weight onto her own shoulders. "I can't," he gasped, collapsing. She knelt beside him, her voice low, meant for him alone. "3 years ago, I carried a 200-pound Marine for 8 miles through mountain terrain with a bullet in my side. You can do this. Together." The words hit him harder than any command. He forced himself up, adjusted his grip. Step by step, they moved. Team 5 finished last, but within the time limit. When the boats finally dropped, Hayes called Mercer aside. For once, no sneer, no test, just silence between them. Finally, he spoke. "I know about Syria. Why didn't you ever mention it?" "With respect, Chief, it wasn't relevant to the training." He studied her, seeing the steel beneath the exhaustion. Then, to her shock, Hayes straightened, saluted sharply. "It's been an honor having you in my class, Lieutenant." The gesture didn't just shift the air. It transformed it. Candidates who had mocked her, doubted her, resented her, they saw now what Hayes had seen. Respect, begrudging and raw, but real. As the 24 survivors stood in formation, Hayes addressed them. "You've survived Hell Week, but you're not SEALs yet, not even close. The hardest parts lie ahead. Look around. These are the ones who didn't quit. These are the ones you trust with your life." And as the sun broke over Coronado, its light spilling across their battered faces, Mercer stood tall among them. No longer the anomaly, not just the first, not just the woman, but a survivor carrying her ghosts, her silence, her promise. And somewhere deep inside, she knew Hell Week wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. How do you trust the water when it's trying to kill you? That was the question written across every face as the candidates stood on the pool deck, gear heavy on their backs, eyes bloodshot from weeks of exhaustion. Hell Week was behind them, but its shadows lingered. 24 remained. 24 shadows of the original 180. The underwater qualification phase would decide who among them could operate where seals lived most in the sea, where silence and precision meant survival. One mistake, one hesitation, and you didn't just fail. You drowned. Mercer stepped forward, scanning the water. It wasn't the vast, untamed ocean this time, but a controlled pool. Yet there was something cruel in its stillness. The instructors stood at the edges like executioners, ready to strip masks, tangle hoses, shut off air. Deliberate sabotage was the point. They weren't testing your lungs, they were testing your mind. When Mercer's name was called, she adjusted her straps, checked her valves. She moved with ritual, calm and exact, but her pulse beat like a drum in her ears. She knew what this was: not training, not really. This was survival disguised as evaluation. She descended into the water. Cold wrapped around her, the muffled silence broken only by her breath. Then the instructors closed in. Two of them. More pressure than anyone else had faced that day. One ripped her regulator free, the other knotted her hoses until they twisted like a noose around her body. Seconds stretched into eternity. Her lungs screamed. Darkness crept at the edges. Panic clawed at her mind, the instinct to fight, to thrash, to surrender. But Mercer stayed still, deliberate. Her hands worked methodically, untangling, switching valves, manually opening what had been closed. 30 seconds without air. 35. Then oxygen filled her chest again, sharp, burning relief. She surfaced, gear secured, task complete. No celebration, no victory, just calm. She reported the malfunction in neutral terms, stripped off her equipment, and moved on. From the sidelines, Evans had watched, his expression tight with anticipation. He'd been waiting for her to fail, waiting for vindication. But when she broke the surface alive, when her discipline carried her through, something shifted in his eyes. Not admiration, not yet, but the first crack in his contempt. Later, Rodriguez found her preparing for the next drill. "I heard what happened in the pool," he said. His voice carried low for her ears alone. "That wasn't an accident. Evans sabotaged your gear." Mercer didn't look up. Her hands moved with steady rhythm, checking seals, adjusting straps. "Equipment fails. That's part of training." Rodriguez shook his head. "That wasn't failure, that was sabotage." Finally, she lifted her eyes, calm, sharp. "If I make it through, it won't be because I complained about unfair treatment. It'll be because I earned it." Her words hung between them like stone. Graduation day came months later. The faces had dwindled again. From 180, there were 18. Dressed in crisp uniforms, standing at attention, their bodies held together by sheer will and pride. Mercer stepped forward when her name was called. The room shifted. The air grew taut, heavy with something no one dared say aloud. Chief Hayes approached her with the gold trident pin, the symbol of everything they had fought for. His voice carried, steady and clear. "You honor this uniform, Lieutenant." His words were not just for her. They were for the room. A message to every doubtful eye, every whispered remark. Rodriguez found her afterward among the celebrating graduates. His face carried no smirk now, only sincerity. "None of us would be here without you," he said. "Especially me." She allowed herself something rare, a smile. "You earned your place." Evans approached then, awkward, stripped of his venom. He stood for a moment, then spoke. "I was wrong about you, about a lot of things." His words were clumsy, but they were honest. Mercer nodded, no triumph in her face, no gloating, just acknowledgement. At sunset, the beach stretched before her, the same sand where her journey had begun. The waves rolled in, soft and endless. She knelt, pressing her hand into the wet earth. Then, with deliberate care, she traced 3 more handprints beside hers. For a moment in the golden light, it seemed as if 3 figures stood beside her. Not visible, but present. ghosts of men she had once promised not to forget. Her voice was quiet, carried away by the breeze. They asked me once why I never quit. The truth is, I made a promise to 3 men who never came home that their sacrifice would mean something. She rose, the trident catching the last rays of sunlight. Whatever came next, she had kept her promise. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. What happens when the training ends and the real war begins? The ceremony was over. The trident pin was hers. For most, it would have been a moment of triumph, years of sacrifice crystallized into a single symbol. But as the sun fell over Coronado, Mercer didn't feel triumph. She felt weight. The pin pressed heavy against her uniform, heavier than the medals she'd been denied, heavier even than the ghost she carried. Because she knew the truth, training was never the end. It was only the doorway. 2 months later, she was wheels down in Eastern Europe, stepping onto cracked asphalt under the cover of night. The air smelled of oil and damp earth. Her new team, SEAL Team 7, Detachment Bravo, moved with quiet efficiency, their boots whispering across the tarmac. No one spoke to her directly, not yet. She was still the outsider, the anomaly. The trident on her chest wasn't enough to erase years of ingrained doubt. Their mission was simple on paper. A high-value target, codenamed Vulture, operating a weapons pipeline through the mountains near the border. Intelligence suggested he was heavily guarded, deeply embedded in villages sympathetic to his cause. Extraction was considered high risk. Mercer's role was support, medic first, operator second. But she knew how support worked. In the field there was no second. Everyone fought. Everyone bled. At the pre-mission briefing, she sat at the far end of the table, listening as the officer in charge, Lieutenant Carter, outlined the plan. His tone was clipped, confident, but his eyes avoided hers. Rodriguez sat 2 seats away, the only familiar face, the only one who had seen her at her rawest. He gave her a small nod when Carter's eyes flicked past her. It was all the acknowledgement she needed. Carter ended with the same line they all used, the same line instructors had drilled into their bones. Questions. His gaze swept the room, then moved on before she could speak. She didn't raise her hand. She had questions, of course, she always had questions. But questions from her would only sound like doubt. Hours later, the team moved under moonlight, boots crunching against frost-hardened soil. The wind cut sharp across the ridgeline, carrying the scent of smoke from unseen villages. Mercer adjusted her pack, fingers brushing against the scent, Michael metal hidden inside. She didn't pray anymore, but she carried it anyway. They hiked for hours, moving as shadows through the terrain. At dawn, they reached Overwatch. The compound lay below, nestled between ridges, guarded by armed men who paced like restless wolves. A small cluster of buildings, satellite dishes rising above, trucks parked haphazardly in the dirt. Carter signaled, "We wait until nightfall." So they waited. Hours dragged. The cold seeped into their bones. Rodriguez leaned near Mercer, whispering under his breath. "Feels like Bud S all over again, except now the sharks shoot back." She almost smiled, almost. When night came, they moved. Silent, deliberate. Every step was calculated, rehearsed in muscle memory. Mercer was in the middle of the column, her rifle steady, her heartbeat even. She remembered the instructors screaming, "Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast." The breach was clean. A door blown, a flashbang hurled, shouts in a foreign tongue. Gunfire cracked. The world narrowed into muzzle flashes and shadows. Mercer stayed low, moving with her team. They cleared one room, then another. Bodies dropped. The air filled with the acrid burn of powder. She stepped over a man clutching his chest, his breath rattling wetly, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Then the call came, "Man down." Her body moved before thought. She sprinted toward the voice, finding Petty Officer Danner on the ground, blood pumping from his thigh in violent spurts. An arterial hit. Seconds from death. Bullets snapped overhead, plaster shattering around them. Mercer dropped beside him, hands already working. Tourniquet, pressure. clamping the wound with a calm that didn't match the chaos. Danner's eyes were wide, his hands clawing at her arm. "Don't let me die," he gasped. "You're not dying today," she said, voice steady. She believed it because she had to. Gunfire raged as her team held the perimeter. Rodriguez crouched beside her, covering her with bursts of fire. "We've got to move," he shouted. "Not yet," she snapped, cinching the tourniquet tighter until Danner screamed. His pulse slowed. The bleeding stopped. Only then did she nod. "Now." Rodriguez hauled Danner over his shoulder, Mercer at his side. They moved through the chaos, smoke stinging their eyes, bodies pressing against walls slick with sweat and blood. When they reached the extraction point, the compound behind them in flames, Carter turned on her. His voice was sharp, accusing. "You jeopardized the mission." Her eyes met his, unflinching. "I saved his life." Carter's jaw tightened. He didn't argue, he didn't thank her either. He just turned away. On the hello ride back, Mercer sat against the wall, helmet resting on her knees. Across from her, Rodriguez met her eyes. "You didn't just save him, you saved all of us." She didn't answer. She stared at her hands instead, still stained with blood. Back at base, Carter filed his report. The mission was a success. Target eliminated, weapons cache destroyed, one operator wounded but stable. Nothing in the official record mentioned how close Danner had come to death. Nothing mentioned Mercer's hands covered in his blood. But in the team's silence, in the way they moved around her afterward, something had changed. Not trust, not yet, but the first fragile thread of it. That night, alone in her quarters, she sat with the photograph again. 4 figures, arms slung over each other's shoulders. She touched the faces of the 3 who weren't here anymore. Her voice was a whisper. Another promise kept. But promises had weight, and each one pressed heavier on her chest. The next morning, Carter gathered the team. His voice was clipped, professional. New orders, high-risk recon, mountain territory, possible chemical weapons stockpile. He looked at each man in turn. Then his gaze lingered on her just a fraction longer than the rest. She knew what it meant. This wasn't trust. This was a test, a chance to see if she would break. And if she did, maybe they would finally see her not as the anomaly, but as one of them. Still deep down, Mercer knew survival wasn't the hardest part. Living with survival was. Because sometimes the mission didn't end when the bullets stopped. Sometimes it followed you into the silence of your own mind. And she was already hearing echoes she couldn't silence. What do you do when the mountain itself feels like an enemy? The convoy stopped at the edge of a nameless valley, headlights blacked out, engines idling in the pre-dawn cold. Frost clung to every surface. The peaks loomed above them like jagged teeth, the sky painted in faint violet as night began to surrender to day. Mercer adjusted her pack, cinching the straps tighter against her shoulders. The silence before movement always pressed hardest, like the air itself was holding its breath. Carter's voice broke it. "We move in 30, standard formation. Stay sharp, intel suggests enemy patrols in the ridgelines." His tone carried authority, but there was something else underneath, tension. He knew this wasn't a clean mission. Recon never was. Mercer fell in line with the others. No one spoke to her, but she felt the glances, the measuring, the weighing. Even after months in country, she was still the outlier. Only Rodriguez treated her like more than a shadow, offering a brief nod as they set off. The ascent began. Every step up the crumbling slopes demanded more from lungs and legs already weary from endless training and missions. Thin air cut into their chests. Boots slipped on loose rock. They moved in silence, weapons ready, scanning the tree line above. Hours passed, then the world shattered. Crack! A single rifle shot echoed across the valley. The lead operator went down, a scream ripped from his throat. Chaos followed. Shouts. Return fire. Muzzle flashes bursting like lightning across the ridgeline. The team scattered for cover, pressing into rocks, returning fire with disciplined bursts. Mercer dropped beside the wounded man. Blood poured from his shoulder, hot against the freezing air. She tore open her med kit, hands moving with brutal precision. Tourniquet, pressure, morphine. The soldier's eyes rolled back, his breath shallow. Rodriguez's voice roared over the gunfire. Contact left, suppressing. Bullets chewed into the stone around them, splinters stinging Mercer's face. She kept working, calm, steady, even as death screamed above her head. Carter crawled into cover, barking orders. "We hold here. Mercer, get him stable." "He's stable enough to move," she shot back. "We need to get him out." "Negative. We hold until QRF is inbound." Her jaw clenched. She looked at the blood soaking through her gloves, then at the narrowing kill zone around them. Waiting meant more casualties, but orders were orders. For the next 20 minutes, time stretched into torment. The wounded operator groaned, drifting in and out of consciousness. The team fought to keep the enemy pinned, fire chewing into their ammo reserves. And through it all, Mercer stayed at his side, her voice low and steady. "Stay with me. Don't you dare quit. Not here." Finally, air support arrived. Jets roared overhead, dropping ordnance that shook the mountains to their core. Explosions ripped across the ridgeline, silence following in their wake. The enemy fire ceased. Carter called for extraction. The wounded man was lifted out first, then the rest of the team. Mercer was last, her boots leaving the ground as the helicopter carried them away from the burning slopes. Back at base, Carter's debrief was clinical. One casualty stabilized, enemy neutralized, mission compromised but intelligence retrieved. His report didn't mention Mercer's hands shaking as she stripped her gloves off, blood soaked through every seam. It didn't mention the moment she looked at the man's pale face and thought of the 3 Marines in Syria, their blood staining her hands in the same way. That night, Rodriguez found her outside, sitting on a low wall near the perimeter, staring at the mountains in the distance. The air was sharp, her breath visible in the moonlight. "You saved him," Rodriguez said quietly. Her voice was flat. "I saved him for now. That's all any of us can do." She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, haunted by shadows only she could see. The missions didn't stop. Weeks blurred. Night raids, patrols, reconnaissance that turned bloody without warning. Mercer's place in the team shifted slowly, grudgingly. They didn't joke with her, didn't share their inside stories, but when bullets flew, they moved with her as if they trusted her more than themselves. Still, Carter remained distant, professional, cold. His commands left no room for debate, no recognition of the woman who had dragged his men back from the edge again and again. Until the night everything broke. The mission was a deep reconnaissance into the mountains, farther than they had ever pushed. The objective: confirm the presence of a chemical weapons facility hidden beneath the ridgeline. Intel was thin. The risk was high. The hike-in was brutal. Thin air, freezing winds, every step a war against their own bodies. By the 3rd day on the mountain, supplies were low. Fatigue hung over the team like a shroud. At dusk, they spotted movement below, enemy patrols, larger than expected, too close for comfort. Carter made the call. "We dig in, observe, report. No engagement unless compromised." The night dragged on, silence broken only by the wind howling through the rocks. Mercer sat in the dark, rifle steady, eyes locked on the valley below. But her mind wasn't there. It drifted to Syria, to the 3 faces in the photograph, to promises whispered to men who never came home. She had kept moving all these years because stopping meant remembering, and remembering meant breaking. Then came the flare. Light burst across the sky. Shouts echoed in the valley. The patrol had found them. Bullets cracked, sparking off stone. The team returned fire, chaos erupting in the night. Carter shouted orders, his voice nearly drowned by the roar of gunfire. "Fall back, regroup on my position." But Rodriguez was pinned, trapped by a machine gun cutting the slope apart. Mercer saw him go down behind a boulder, alive but stuck. Without thinking, she moved. Low, fast, sliding into cover beside him. "You good?" she hissed. "Ammo's low, can't move." She scanned the slope, calculated in seconds. Then she did the thing Carter had forbidden since day one. She broke from formation. Covering fire, smoke grenade, a sprint across open ground that felt like a lifetime. She reached the machine gun nest, her knife flashing in the dark, silencing the operator before he could scream. Then she dragged Rodriguez to his feet. "Move." They staggered back toward the team, bullets chasing their heels. Carter's face was thunder when they regrouped. "You disobeyed a direct order." "I saved his life," she snapped back, her voice sharp, defiant. For a moment the two of them locked eyes. Commander and lieutenant, man and woman, duty and defiance. Then Carter turned away, shouting for extraction. The team pulled out under fire, barely making it to the helo. The mountains roared behind them, enemy forces swarming the ridges they had just escaped. Back at base, Carter filed his report. Mission compromised. Facility unconfirmed. Casualties avoided. But in the private notes only he saw, he wrote a single line. Mercer endangered the mission by prioritizing individuals over orders. Rodriguez cornered her after the debrief. His voice was fierce, protective. "You did the right thing. Don't let him tell you otherwise." But Mercer's eyes were distant, her voice hollow. "The right thing doesn't matter if it costs the mission." She turned away before he could answer, walking into the dark alone. That night in her quarters, she pulled out the photograph again. 4 figures, 3 gone, 1 left. Her thumb brushed over their faces until her hand trembled. Then she pressed the St. Michael medal into her palm, its edges cutting into her skin. A whisper escaped her lips. "I promised." But promises, she knew, were not without cost. And in the silence of the base, as the mountains loomed in the distance, Mercer wondered if this promise would be the one that finally broke her. How much does loyalty cost when loyalty itself is questioned? The base was quiet at night, but it was never truly silent. Generators hummed, radios crackled with distant traffic, boots echoed on concrete as sentries patrolled in the dark. Inside the barracks, most of the team slept in exhausted oblivion. But Mercer lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her body heavy yet her mind relentless. The mountain op had left scars not just on the skin but deeper. Carter's anger still lingered in the air like smoke. He hadn't confronted her directly since the debrief, but she could feel it in every clipped word, every glance that cut past her. The team followed his lead. They obeyed his orders, but when eyes turned toward her, the weight of doubt remained. Rodriguez tried. He ate beside her when others avoided her table. He sparred with her in the training pit when partners were scarce. But even his words couldn't strip away the truth. She was on borrowed trust. One mistake away from losing everything she had bled for. The next mission briefing came 3 days later. The target, a convoy believed to be transporting chemical precursors across the border. The goal was simple: intercept, confirm, and destroy. Carter's tone was cold, deliberate. "We move fast, we move clean, no deviations, no cowboy tactics." His eyes slid toward Mercer, lingering just long enough for the message to land. No one missed it. She said nothing, she didn't flinch. But inside, a flame burned. Not anger, something older, heavier. She had been doubted before, dismissed, ignored. She knew how to wear silence like armor. The convoy op began under a moonless sky. The team lay in overwatch positions along a dirt road, their rifles trained on the bend where headlights would appear. The cold gnawed at their fingers. Their breath fogged in the air. Minutes dragged like hours. Then engines, a low growl rising from the valley. Headlights cut through the dark, trucks, 3 of them, rolling heavy with cargo. Carter's hand went up. "Stand by, confirm before we hit." The first truck passed, armed guards in the back. The second followed, canvas covering its load. The third came last, slower, dragging a plume of exhaust. Rodriguez's voice hissed over comms. "Thermals reading irregular. That back truck, loaded with more than supplies." Carter's reply was firm. "We wait for full visual." But Mercer's eyes caught movement, the flicker of a hand signal from one of the guards, a glance toward the ridgeline. Ambush. Her voice cut across the net. "They know we're here, it's a setup." Carter snapped back. "Hold position, Lieutenant, that's an order." She hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her. Every scar told her this was the moment. Waiting meant death. Then it happened. Gunfire ripped from the ridgeline, tracer rounds slashing across the dark. The convoy guards opened up, bullets raining toward their position. The ambush had sprung. Chaos followed. The team returned fire, explosions lighting the valley as RPGs streaked through the night. Carter barked orders, but the formation was already broken. Mercer dropped into cover, her rifle spitting controlled bursts. Rodriguez moved beside her, calm under pressure. "Call it," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "What do we do?" She didn't hesitate. "Flank left, cut off their support." They moved as one, low and fast, weaving through rocks as bullets sparked overhead. Mercer's shots dropped 2 gunners on the ridgeline. Rodriguez suppressed the rest. Together, they carved a path that allowed the rest of the team to regroup and push forward. By the time the last explosion faded, the valley was quiet. The trucks burned, their cargo erupting in chemical plumes that hissed and spat into the night. Masks went on, filters hissing as the team pulled back. Extraction was frantic, the hello blades beating the air as they lifted away from the ruined convoy. Back at base, Carter's fury ignited. In the debrief room, his voice shook with rage. "You disobeyed a direct order again. You jeopardized this entire team." Mercer's jaw tightened. "If I hadn't moved, we'd have been overrun." "That wasn't your call," he roared. His fist slammed against the table. "You don't get to gamble with lives because your instincts told you something." The room was silent. The team shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between them. Finally, Rodriguez spoke. "She was right, sir. If we'd waited, we'd be dead." Carter's glare cut into him, but Rodriguez didn't back down. The commander exhaled, sharp and bitter. "One more step out of line, Mercer. One, and you're done." She nodded once, not submission, survival. But the cracks widened. That night, as she stripped her gear, she noticed something wrong. A strap loosened, one that she always secured with ritual precision. She checked again. Another piece of gear tampered with, subtle but deliberate. Sabotage. Her stomach sank. She knew immediately who. Not Carter, his anger was loud, direct. This was quieter, smaller, a grudge nursing itself in the dark. Evans. The same man who had resented her since the first day of training. The same one who had smirked when her gear failed underwater. He had been reassigned to another detachment months ago, but he was back now, rotating through. And his eyes still carried the same venom. She said nothing. She fixed her gear, double-checked every strap, every valve, every magazine. And then she sat in the dark, alone, the weight of betrayal settling over her shoulders. Trust was already fragile, now it was poisoned. 2 days later, another mission. High-risk insertion. A hidden depot, believed to store not just weapons, but the chemical stockpile that had haunted their intelligence reports. Destroying it would cripple the enemy's pipeline. The briefing was tense. Carter laid out the plan, his voice clipped, his eyes daring Mercer to speak. She didn't, not once. But as she checked her gear later, her hands moved slower than usual. Not because she doubted her equipment, she had checked it 10 times over, but because she doubted the men around her. Would the strap hold? Would the valve stay open? Would a teammate pull her up if she slipped? Or would silence swallow her, the same way it had swallowed 3 men in Syria? When the hello lifted off that night, the roar of its blades drowning the silence, Mercer sat in the corner, helmet pressed to her chest. Her eyes closed. She wasn't thinking of the mission. She was thinking of promises. Promises to men who had trusted her. Promises to herself that she would not break. And a question that gnawed at her, as the lights of the base disappeared into the dark. What happens when the enemy you face isn't just out there, but right beside you? How do you fight a war on two fronts, one against the enemy and one against your own? The helicopter cut low across the valley, blades thundering against the night. Inside, the team sat silent, faces hidden behind night vision lenses and hardened masks. No words, just the hum of fear disguised as focus. Mercer checked her gear again, hands moving by instinct. She didn't trust anyone else to have done it right. Not after the tampering. Not after the loosened strap, the twisted valve. Evans hadn't said a word, but she saw it in his eyes every time they crossed. Hatred, sharp and quiet. Carter gave the hand signal, 2 minutes. The depot lay below, tucked into a canyon. Intelligence marked it as a weapons hub, guarded but not impenetrable. The real danger was inside, canisters of chemical agents stockpiled for transport. One wrong shot, one spark, and the valley itself would become a tomb. The helo dipped, ropes deployed. Mercer was fourth down. Her boots hit the dirt, knees bending into the landing. She swept her sector, rifle ready. Around her, the team fanned out in formation. Carter led. Rodriguez covered the rear. Evans fell in on her flank, his movements deliberate, too deliberate. They advanced in silence, shadows weaving through shadows. The canyon walls loomed high, cutting off the sky. Ahead, the depot glowed faintly, light spilling from gaps in corrugated steel walls. Guards paced lazily, unaware of the storm descending. Carter signaled, 2 teams, breach from north and south. Set charges on the storage units, confirm the chemicals, then exfil, fast, clean. Mercer's team approached the southern entrance. Her pulse stayed steady, but her mind whispered reminders. Check the corners, watch the angles, don't trust the silence. The breach was quick, precise. A guard dropped before he could scream, another silenced with a knife. They moved inside. The air grew heavy, tainted with the metallic tang of chemicals. Rows of drums and canisters stretched into the dark, marked with stenciled warnings in languages they didn't all understand. Death stacked in neat lines. Mercer scanned the room, her rifle light cutting across labels. Nerve agents, enough to choke entire cities. Her stomach clenched. Destroying this wasn't just a mission. It was survival for people who would never know their names. Set charges, Carter ordered over comms, 2 minutes. The team spread out. Mercer dropped to one knee, placing her charge carefully at the base of a stack. Her fingers were steady, but her ears caught something, the faint scrape of movement behind her. She turned. Evans stood over her, too close, too still. Her gut knew before her mind did. He leaned close, his voice low, venomous. "You don't belong here." Then he moved, fast. His boot snapped into her side, knocking her against the steel drums. The sound echoed like thunder. She rolled, rifle swinging up, but he was already on her. His hand slammed down, shoving her barrel aside. "They'll never accept you," he hissed. "Not here, not anywhere." She struggled, their fight masked by the chaos of the team's movements around them. His knife flashed. The blade tore through her gear strap, the same strap that had been tampered with before. Confirmation. Rage surged through her, not wild but focused. She twisted, using his weight against him, driving her elbow into his throat. He staggered, choking, and she wrenched free. Her rifle came up, centered on his chest. For a heartbeat, time froze. Killing him meant survival, but it also meant fracture. Proof to Carter that she couldn't be trusted, proof to the world that she had failed their test of silence. Evans smirked through the blood on his lips. "Do it." But she didn't. She shifted her aim, fired into the wall behind him. The crack of the shot echoed. "Move again," she said, her voice cold, controlled, and next time no hesitation. He glared, but something in her eyes, the steadiness, the absolute certainty, made him falter. Rodriguez appeared then, rifle sweeping. He saw Evans, saw Mercer's stance, and his jaw tightened. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He just gave her a nod, silent trust in the middle of the storm. The charges were set. Carter's voice cut over comms. Exfil now. They withdrew fast, the canyon filling with the roar of their detonations. The depot erupted, fire tearing through steel and concrete, chemicals igniting in violent bursts. The ground shook beneath their boots as they sprinted for extraction. The helicopter lifted them away as the valley burned, flames licking the sky. From above, it looked like the earth itself was screaming. Back at base, Carter delivered the report. Objective complete, no casualties, depot destroyed. His tone was even professional, but when his eyes met Mercer's, something different lingered there. Not approval, not forgiveness, but recognition. Later, Rodriguez found her outside again, sitting in the cold with the St. Michael medal in her hand. He lowered himself beside her, quiet for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. "You could have killed him. Why didn't you?" Her eyes stayed on the medal. "Because this isn't about me, it's about the promise." "What promise?" She closed her fist around the medal, the edges biting into her skin. "That I'd carry them with me. That their sacrifice would mean something. If I break here, if I let hate decide for me, then I've already failed." Rodriguez studied her, then nodded slowly. "You haven't failed, Sam, not once." She didn't answer. She just stared into the dark, listening to the hum of generators and the distant sound of helicopters, as if the war itself was breathing. Weeks later, the team rotated home. The deployment was over. Medals were handed out, reports filed, names recorded in history's margins. But for Mercer, none of it mattered. One evening, she walked alone on a quiet beach, the ocean stretching endless before her. The sunset painted the sky in hues of fire and blood. She knelt in the sand, pressing her palm flat against it. Then, with deliberate care, she traced 3 handprints beside her own, the same 3 she had carried since Syria. For a moment, the breeze shifted, and she could almost feel them there. The weight of their hands on her shoulders, the echo of their voices reminding her she wasn't alone. She whispered into the wind, her words swallowed by the surf. "They laughed when I walked into training. They doubted when I stood in formation. They tried to break me, sabotage me, bury me. But I didn't quit, because I promised you I wouldn't." The waves pulled the handprints away, erasing them, but she didn't need them to last. She carried them inside. She rose, the trident pin catching the last light of day. Her steps left no mark on the sand behind her. And the voice of the narrator lingered like a final truth. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.